What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. One of the greatest joys in all of Pokemon is after training up your partners, they suddenly transform into a brand new creature, evolving into a new stage. And as cool as spontaneous changes can be, it doesn't always benefit every Pokemon to be a part of an evolutionary family, and in fact, some Pokemon would likely be better off if they weren't connected to any other, like some of the classic one-offs. So, let's take a look at some of the Pokemon that would be better off as a single stage. Number 6. Overqwil. Now you might say, hold on there, Qwilfish needed a bunch of help. And that is definitely true, I've said as much for years, but we need to see if all of that hubbub was worth it for the new guy as well. See, Qwilfish, after decades of languishing at the bottom of the barrel, finally received an evolution, but with a catch. As we know, Qwilfish first got a Hisuian form, and then it was able to evolve into Overqwil, one of the best pun names in generations. Don't get me wrong, the form helped Qwilfish out a lot because Poison and Dark is an amazing type combination, but that also means that the original Qwilfish is completely unable to become an Overqwil, and we see this on full display in Gen 9 when the Water Balloon Pokemon was back to normal and the vastly superior Overqwil was nowhere to be found. So the alternative, Overqwil being its own Pokemon, would have been far better for it, so that it wouldn't have to be banished away anytime the standard Johto fish returns. It's not like it would be too out of place to have multiple pufferfish-inspired Pokemon when the likes of Lovedisk and Alomomola exist. The main reason those were so egregious was because of their shared mono-water typing, but Qwilfish and Overqwil have different ones, so that solves the issue. I mean, you would never say we can't have more than one crocodile Pokemon when they've all been different types. So if the Pin Cluster Pokemon had its own identity, instead of being dragged down by Qwilfish, we could get this naval mine whenever we wanted without needing to be held back by the whims of whether Qwilfish decides to be purple or not this generation. Number 5. Bellossom. I touched on this topic before and discussed the Johto evolution of Hitmontop, since it was seemingly so disconnected from the other established members of its line, but I think Bellossom falls into the same camp. See, the problem is Bellossom has nothing to do with the Oddish line whatsoever. The general arm shape is about the only shared trait that they have, and I guess that they're both grass types, but since Bellossom ditched the original coloring of the line, you wouldn't even know they're related unless you were told. And actually, the typings don't connect them all that much either, since the Johto branch lost the poison that the rest of the line had, meaning that all it does now is constantly disrespect Bellsprout for being overlooked for its own evolution. So if Bellossom were on its own as a brand new Pokemon, it would have been far more accepted from the start, instead of trying to decide if you need one for the Dex bad enough to lose out on Vileplume, who seemingly got more uses in battle anyway. Bellossom could just be the Johto Pokemon to properly show off pure grass if you didn't pick Chikorita. Although I'm honestly convinced that the only reason they didn't get the fairy type is because it was already part of an established line. That's not a good reason, but that's the only one I can think of. So being an evolution also kept Bellossom from a much-needed type addition. As it stands, it's kind of a waste of a Sunstone anyway. I mean, it can't even claim to be the only one with Quiver Dance, so there's no real reason to invest in it so heavily, whereas if it were a standalone, you could simply catch a wild one in the mid-game just to see what it's all about. Because as of now, you have to pass up a lot of better options just to wait for this dancing flower to show up. Number 4. Dragonite. This one might surprise you to denigrate the original pseudo-legendary and say it shouldn't be one at all, but I truly think that it would benefit everyone involved if Dragonite had been its own thing. It's no surprise that people look at Dragonite and wonder how it could even come from Dratini, which is fair because the slender, beautiful blue dragon serpents turning into a pudgy yellow character from Dragon Tales was always a bit jarring. I mean, all of the limbs just pop up out of nowhere, including the wings. And that's actually worth noting too, aside from the drastic design changes, this Pokemon actually gains the flying type. Now, I'm not sure that this was necessary since at least Dragonair has been depicted as flying without the actual type attached. So I don't think that flying is a necessity if you wanted to just have it soar through the air like the ancient legends. But this also requires a bit of a history lesson. See, back in Gen 1, there was only a single dragon-type attack, which, as you may know, was Dragon Rage. Of course, instead of using the Pokemon's attack power, this move always does 40 damage. So without Fairy, the Gen 1 dragons were only weak to Ice. However, adding the flying type with Dragonite makes the ice weakness so pronounced that you'll almost always die. So if the dragons actually got to stay dragon, and we didn't have to wait until Gen 5 to get a fully evolved one, and then Dragonite got to be its own separate Pokemon, that would not only give some variety in fully evolved dragon types, but also make whatever did evolve from Dratini and Dragonair be more durable, and then if people want to try out Dragonite instead, maybe to use Fly or something like that, you'd be able to appreciate it on its own, rather than grumbling about how it ruined the majesty of the Serpentine Drakes, and then let Dragonite stand as its own thing without the pressure and expectations unfairly placed on it, benefiting everybody. Number 3. Urshifu. It's still rather new for Legends to evolve at all, like you could maybe say that it would be worthwhile to pluck out Cosmoem from the Sun and Moon mascot line, but I think we can all agree that the legendary Urshifu could easily run solo. Now, I don't really hate Cubfu, but it's just so bland. I mean, how can this be considered a legend at all? It's just a less interesting Stuffle. And, okay, there is like a little quest thing where you quote-unquote bond with it, but did this really work for people? I mean, you had to cart a tiny bear up to a mountain that you had already been to numerous times just to take a selfie or whatever? Does that really make you feel closer to it? I know the battling sure didn't. Because this was a DLC Pokemon, you've pretty much beaten the game by then, meaning they want you to take it up to level 70 in order to beat the towers. So instead of a sweet new battling partner, I just fed it a sugar coma's worth of experience candies. Now, you might say that the gimmick of choosing which form of Urshifu you want is cool, and sure, that is a neat idea, but it didn't need evolution to do it. Legends get items to change their forms and types all the time, so you could just get a regular base form of Urshifu that's pure fighting, and then you could choose to train through whichever tower you wanted. Or, hey, maybe both. It's honestly weird that you can't alternate between the forms and that they're locked in. So if you could earn both scrolls by beating through either tower, at a much lower level by the way, then why not allow players to freely shift through the different stances? Then we wouldn't have to waste any time with an underwhelming timid teddy bear, and we could actually enjoy the Wushu Pokemon instead of making a legendary gift feel a lot more like a chore instead. Number 2. Chimecho. I won't spend long on this one because it's fairly obvious. Chimecho was on its own when it was first introduced, and it was frankly better. Chingling is the Pokemon that I forget the most. I am always surprised when I am met with its continued existence because it's barely connected to Chimecho's theme, having a jingle bell turn into a wind chime, and then it doesn't gain anything from having a baby anyway. Most babies are inoffensive, and some can be pretty cool, like Munchlax or Bonsly, but Chingling is pitiful. At least Lickitung could use Eviolite after its horrible Sinnoh relative was introduced, but Chingling is beneath Chimecho in more ways than one. So would anybody really complain if we restored this Pokemon to its former glory, letting you capture it in the wild like you used to? Because Chimecho was and is a perfectly fine Pokemon by itself, and really all Chingling does is confuse people and make them think, I don't really want to put in that much effort, so I don't need a Chimecho for this run, do I? Number 1. Espathra. I've not yet been able to try out every Pokemon I wanted to in the Paldea region, but when I first caught a Flittle, I did not expect it to turn into an ancient Egyptian ostrich. I'm not saying that I hate Flittle, but what even is it? A wad of tissues? I don't have a problem with it being a psychic type, but what about this thing would ever lead you to think that it would become a giant bird, let alone one based on Cleopatra? Now, Flittle is surprisingly fast, I'll give you that, but its defenses and HP are non-existent, so it's going to die far too often. And unfortunately, when it doesn't evolve until level 35, which is far later than its early game contemporaries, it makes Flittle a liability too weak to realistically use on the way to greatness. I mean, I ditched my Smoliv because 25 was too long of a wait to evolve, but if I had held on to it, I could have gotten a full-blown 3rd stage Arpaliva by the time my Flittle would have evolved, which has higher base stats anyway. Not to mention the comparable starters just one level later. I am not saying that Espathra is bad or that its stats aren't good enough. I mean, it's got the great signature attack Lumina Crash and Opportunist ability, but why would you toil so long with a Pokemon that struggles to contribute when you could just get something more powerful and worth your while easier? The answer is you wouldn't. which is precisely why I'm betting most players just captured a wild Espathra later in the game and didn't bother evolving it at all. And honestly, there's still probably a good chunk of people that don't even know these Pokemon are related. So if you're going to relegate Espathra to being treated like a single-stage mid-game Pokemon anyway, why not make it that way from the start? It seems like the Ostrich Queen of the Nile has more than enough going on to stand out on its own, so there was really no reason to turn it into the most baffling evolution since Octillery. And in fact, it somehow makes it less impressive when it is shackled to what is basically a weak baby Pokemon, instead of being allowed to bask in the intriguing oddity that it is that comes out of nowhere to blow you away, in the steps of classic one-offs like an Absol, Wishiwashi, or Carnivine. As much as an argument could be made for Dunsparce to be on this list, if we're looking at Paldea, I think there is no other Pokemon that would benefit from remaining by itself more than Espathra, instead of all of its mystery being evaporated by a wimpy burden that you're unlikely to ever get past anyway. But those are just some Pokemon that could fare better on their own. There are plenty more Pokemon that don't need to have multiple stages in their line. So which Pokemon do you think could be better off as a single stage? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.